Hello, I'm Jeff Atkinson, owner of Stream Counseling Services and a licensed therapist. Welcome back to part 2 of a 4-part introduction of the Satisfied Soul series. In part 1, we discussed how focusing only on outward behavior and not our core identity was not the best way of living. It tends to keep us hovering around the drudgery end of the Christian experience, and it can result in a wide schism between our identity and our behavior, causing significant mental health strain. And I used this diagram to show how some people live their Christian existence using a combination of sheer commitment and rigid discipline, fueled by a vague sense of duty to repay, to conform their outward behavior into how they believe they should act. And I said that in this part 2, I would discuss the better way of living, which moves us toward the other end of the spectrum, where we are changed at our core into people so filled up and satisfied that behavior flows more naturally, and the inner and the outer person start to become more integrated. So let me start this with a quick story. 2 neighbors were arguing over whose dog was a better digger, and so they decided to have a competition to see which dog could dig 5 holes the fastest. They had a week to train. The first man trained every hour that week, commanding the dog to dig, and when the dog achieved a right depth, he would praise him and scratch him behind his ears. The second man did no training whatsoever. On the day of the competition, the first man's dog performed well. He would listen to his master, race to the hole, dig for a while, and come back for his praise. And he repeated this 5 times and completed this course in 7 minutes. The man was confident that he would win. The second dog, who received no training whatsoever, did it in 90 seconds. But how? How did you do that? Asked the first man. Well, said the second, this dog is crazy for bacon, so I just buried 5 pieces of it in the yard. He didn't need me to tell him anything. I just turned him loose. The end. So this dog loved digging simply because it yielded great satisfaction in the end. And so far in these videos, I've equated God with bacon, gnats, and mosquitoes, but therein lies the point. So equate digging holes to the work of Bible reading, praying, and good works. The first dog did these things because he was trained to, commanded to, and his reward was a pat on the head. He felt good about himself for a minute. The second dog dug holes because he was crazy for the end result, bacon. So, if we develop great satisfaction in God Himself, the pursuit, the digging, is easier, and it's a means to an end, not the end itself. And here is the other point of this series. If we pursue God Himself, that is how He will become our great satisfaction. The way you grow to love bacon is to be around it, smell it, taste it. And the way you grow to enjoy God is to feel Him, taste Him, see Him more in His full glory. And the more you see Him as He is, the more you are caught in a tractor beam that draws you to Him. Let's go back to our diagram, this first way of living with hyper-focus on outward behavior. It leaves us hovering closer to the drudgery end of the Christian experience. The second way of living, pursuing God Himself, moves us toward the other end, where we are filled and satisfied with God Himself. And when that happens, everything changes. And this is not something that comes naturally for most of us, because it is supernatural. And fair warning, this better way is supernatural, metaphysical. That means beyond natural, beyond physical. And in fact, this particular video, this part two of this 4-part introduction is going to be the most out there, the most metaphysical of the whole video series. So parts 3 and 4 of this introduction are much more practical, explaining the how of getting satisfied in God. But this way of living is not natural for most of us. For one, we are creatures who are used to looking down and in at ourselves. And secular counseling says that is where the answer lies, in yourself. Augustine coined the phrase, curvatus in se, man curled in on himself, describing how anything curled in has a natural sinful limit and you can't go any further. But Christians escape this limit when they realize that they were made to look up and out and be connected with something infinite, God Himself. He's not only the source of everything, He is the point of everything. And until we look up and see the point and are reconciled to it, we're trapped by this limit, this finitude. So, pursuing God Himself strengthens our connection to something infinite and glorious, and that's when our identity changes. Okay, very lofty speech, so let's use pictures to better explain. And at this point, I need to talk about the difference between believers and unbelievers. An unbeliever is represented by this. This is a person who does not yet know God, has not had his eyes opened to the truth of who God is or His massive love. And so they are by themselves, powerless to change their identity. So they attempt to use their own internal resources to change. Unfortunately, Christians also often fall into the same trap, so inward focused and focused on behavior, even though they have a massive invitation and massive ability to do something different, because they are something different. So remember, as Christians, our identity is no longer confined to ourselves, our own soul. Rather, we are now primarily defined by our connection to the God who made us. Reconnection to God Himself through Christ, through the cross, that's the heart of the gospel. That is our identity now. And I want to linger on this diagram because it represents what may be a relatively new idea for some. It's hard to imagine yourself, your identity, being linked to or informed by or made up of something besides yourself, isn't it? And there are multiple nexuses with God, but here are a few examples that may help. If you're married, especially for a long time, you can see part of how this principle works. Being connected to someone can change you, and with us humans, that change can be positive or negative. The more connected we are relationally, emotionally, physically, sexually, the greater the change to your identity. The analogy breaks down, of course, because just like everything on earth, we're limited by our humanness. So the essence of your marriage partner cannot reside in you. So your connection to your spouse can only inform your identity so far. Or how about this example of something outside you, some truth outside you, changing your identity? Imagine you are dirt poor. Putting food on the table and gas in your broken down car will be a lifelong struggle. And your personality could very well reflect your situation. You're cranky. You don't really care to engage people. You're depressed and maybe lazy. Your place is a mess. And then you get a letter in the mail. A rich uncle thousands of miles away has decided to be your benefactor. He's still working out the details with the lawyer, so it'll take a month or so, but it's coming. Now, do you have to say to yourself, be happy, start to engage with people, don't be depressed? Your soul doesn't respond with drudgery, not if you believe the news. You don't have to say to yourself, be happy, you just are. You are happy, you are peaceful. Your behavior likely follows. Your identity has changed based on something outside yourself. Now, how about a physical example of something outside of you changing you? My family recently hiked to the base of a 400-foot waterfall. And we had seen pictures of it, and they were beautiful, but they did little to change us. But when you were at the base of a waterfall like this, you're in the vicinity of something glorious. There's the roar of the crashing. There's a constant blast of air and mist emanating from the falls that adds to the intimidation and drama. There's a fresh smell and the knowledge of the sheer force of the water, and your heart beats faster and you smile a bit nervously as you look up and behold this awesome power. And that experience has a much better chance of sticking with you and changing you. And now for a very metaphysical point. Recall I just said the essence of our marriage partner cannot reside in us, but Christ can, and we in him. He says it many times in the Bible, but none so dramatically and emphatically as he did during the final night before his death. Remember that it is the night before the event that all of created history rotated on, this horrible, wonderful thing. And Jesus has one last opportunity to plant in the minds of the disciples the point of these coming events, the point of his coming, and the very point of our existence. And so he prays, and Christ's prayer is full of metaphysical imagery of two things, proximity and glory. He talks about being in us and we in him, about witnessing glory and the joy. And that makes ultimate sense, right? The effect of the gospel is to reconcile us to God, bring back together, reconnect. And reconnect with what? A heavenly spouse who is perfect in every way, a benefactor with infinite resources, not for our pocketbook, but for our souls, and someone infinitely more glorious than a waterfall. Now, again, it's not intuitive to think that looking outside oneself will yield greater joy, greater peace. But the positive psychological impact of looking outside oneself is borne out by multiple verses. 2 Corinthians 3:18 says, "And we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another." Romans 8 says, "Set your mind on the things of the Spirit, God, Christ, his glory in everything. For to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace." So this diagram is a spot-on representation of the identity of a believer. And what will we find because of it? What will we find when we are back with God, close with God? And that too is all over the Bible. In your presence is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Rejoice in God. Again, I say rejoice. Hope in God. Delight yourself in the Lord. Look at all these emotion words. Joy, rejoice, hope, delight. These are all things of the heart. So when this starts to become who you are, this intimate proximity, us in God, God in us, we start to experience what we were made for, seeing savoring and showing the glory of God. Okay, we may be way over our ski tips at this point, but remember, this is the big idea, and the next 2 videos get much more practical, describing how to develop this ability to feast on God and to cultivate these affections. So hang in there, I'm almost done. I just need to finish baiting the hook by telling you what happens as you proceed along this path. Bible reading and prayer become a means to more God, not an end in themselves. We start to look like the disciples. We love God naturally because we are blown away by His love. We see His glory everywhere, even in the mundane. We live with eternity in mind. We genuinely love others and we live and die to connect them to God. We are heartbroken that some don't have God. And one of my favorite byproducts, we live without fear. And obedience and holy living become more desirable, more organic and natural. 2 John says, "He who loves me will obey me." And let me rephrase that verse. He who is head over heels in love with me, which happens when we see him for who he is, will automatically want to do what I want them to do. Love God, love the world. Now, how do I know that I am right? At least 2 reasons. First, I believe Jesus' words when he said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field." It doesn't say he found a treasure and in his rigid discipline and stark commitment, he swallowed hard and went and sold everything he had. No, he had found the mother lode, God himself. Second, I believe the description of the disciples. They were animated, energized, mobilized, not by sheer commitment or stark discipline and a duty to repay. They were motivated by joy. So let's look at some verses to test this, and then we will be done. In Acts 5, it says, "The religious leaders beat them and charged them not to speak in the name of Jesus, and let them go. Then they left the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer dishonor for the name." It doesn't say they left the presence of the council pretending to be happy because they knew up here they should be. When Paul and Silas were in prison, in the stocks, what did they do? How did they respond? They sang. Did they do that because they thought, well, if we sing, that will make others think we are truly spiritual, and then they will consider God? No, they did it because they had absolute joy. And how? How did they do it? They were changed, having spent time in the very presence of God. And remember the payoff verse of this whole series: "In your presence is fullness of joy. In your right hand are pleasures forevermore." So here we are at the end of part 2 of the introduction. In parts 3 and 4, we will discuss in more practical terms how to get satisfied in God. And we will talk about this, a red line which prevents many people from experiencing this connection and satisfaction. Thanks for watching.